In the past 6 weeks, I've been doing my 5-year rubber replacement. And this project is a project that a lot of Rotax owners do. If you own a 912 UL or ULS, then every 5 years you will take your rubber hoses and certain parts of the engine off and replace them with new ones. And the whole point of doing this is to make sure that the engine is in as safe a condition as possible for flying. So one of the big problems I had starting out this project was knowing what parts to buy and where to buy them online. So this being such a big project, I kind of started out with a spreadsheet and then jumped between forums and online mechanics, and they sent me back kind of lists of things, and I started compiling everything into a spreadsheet. So over the course of doing this project, I've kind of updated the spreadsheet, and now what I have is a list, or my shopping list, of what I purchased to get this done. So I'm going to talk through that today, and hopefully you can use this as maybe a guide or a template as to what to buy and where to get things from. So I've listed everything out, I've drawn out what my system looked like, and I'll link everything in the description section so that you can go and find these things on your own. And then I'll also put some bookmarks in for certain sections of the video so you can skip to those just in case you need to go to a certain area or you need to focus on a certain area. So I'm going to kick it off now. I'm going to just talk through every section, and then hopefully you'll find this useful for your own maintenance. So the fuel system is broken down into 5 different sections for the replacement project. The fuel return line, the distribution block, the fuel pump, the Gascolator, and then an optional fuel pressure sensor. So I have drawn this out in a very interesting looking diagram here, and I've got 2 versions of it. I've got the one that isn't annotated, and then I have an annotated version. It's broken down into the fuel return line, which is this kind of larger pink blob, and that's 3 different sections. There's the cockpit section, then there's what's on the firewall, the bulkhead fitting, and then we've got everything firewall forward. And then the second system is the distribution, which includes the distribution block, and then we have the fuel pump, and then we have the Gascolator section, and we have the fuel pressure sensor and gauge. So I'll talk through each one of those. The fuel return line is broken into 5 different sections itself, and I started off with the fuel hose, and purely because that's kind of one of the most important parts of the system. And I'm using what's called Parker Superflex 397, and I'm using for the fuel return line 1/4 inch, and then for just certain other parts I also use 5/16 inch, but this is pretty much the hose I use all the way through the project. And for the fuel return line, I've got this 1/4 inch, it's $2.90 a foot, and if we look on the diagram, you can see that that is used inside the cockpit in a couple of places, and then we have the firewall forward section that also uses the fuel line. The second part of the fuel return line is the restrictor, and that's probably the piece that most people know about. They know that you have to, when you're running a fuel return line, that you have to reduce the size of the line, and that's kind of just so that the fuel pump doesn't pump fuel back into the header tank as opposed to pumping it to the carbs. This section includes a hose fitting, a coupler, and the restrictor, another coupler, and another hose fitting. So if we talk through those bits, the threaded flow control orifice I got from McMaster Car, and I think I have a proper link for it. Yeah, there we go. And it was $9.44. You can get a few different sizes, but I chose that. It's actually brass. These coupling fittings are also brass, and then this hose nipple to MPT is brass as well, as I've outlined here. So let's look at the coupling. It's the, I think it's the 1/8 inch, so it's the 1D brass 1690. So 2 of those, sort of expensive. And then the hose nipple to MPT are both brass as well. So they're the 1/8 inch NPT thread to 1/4 inch, and they're $12.80 each. So this whole setup, the $10 plus $32 plus $24, it's a kind of an expensive setup. You can actually buy the Rotax distribution block, and it comes with a bolt that has a little orifice reducer in it, and I didn't go down that route. On top of that, we have the fuel line. So there is 1/4 inch fuel Parker Superflex, and then on top of that there's fire sleeve. The fire sleeve that I actually bought the wrong version of it a couple of times, and it's really expensive, so you don't want to do that. I found with the Parker Superflex, the Dash 11 was the best fit. It was kind of a tough fit. And then I have these 13.3 millimeter Otica clamps. So they're about 35 cents each. And then the Bandit clamps. So this pattern that you see, the fuel line, the fire sleeve, the Otica clamp, and the Bandit clamp, that gets repeated multiple times through the diagram. Inside the cockpit, I don't have the fuel sleeve or the Bandit clamps, but I do have Otica clamps to connect the hose onto these push lock fittings. I'm not sure if you need the Otica clamps on a hose on push lock fittings, but I've done that. But you can see outside of the firewall, anywhere firewall forward, I do a fuel line, a fire sleeve, and then a Bandit clamp, and then an Otica clamp. That pattern again. This is kind of the first time we'll see this, but we'll see this, and the only difference between a couple of these versions or a couple of these patterns is that we go from a 1/4 to a 5/16, and then the Otica clamp is 14.4 or 14.5. So you can see that in the spreadsheet, which I'm going to link below. Wherever I have this pattern, so in the fuel return line, there's the fuel hose, and then the fire sleeve, Otica clamp, Bandit clamp. It's colored in pink. I've got 4 feet fire sleeve. Actually, 2 feet was all that was needed for the fuel return line. 6 feet of the Parker Superflex. So some of that doesn't use the fire sleeve on it. And then we see the pattern again. And then where it's kind of this purple color, it's the 5/16 with the 14.5. And then the next section is the check valve. So inside in the diagram, we have that inside the firewall. So that's to present, inside the cockpit. And that's to prevent fuel that's running back through the fuel return line. When the plane is off and it's just sitting there, it's to prevent fuel from running out of the header tank and then back. So it's a check valve that allows fuel to run right to left, so back into the header tank, but it doesn't let it run left to right, back out of the header tank into the carbs. And so these 1/4 inch fittings need to be, so dash 4 AN need to be expanded up to dash 6, so 6/16, which is 3/8, and then this check valve is 3/8. So if we look here, we have the check valve is the dash 6, and it's $25. And then we have 2 dash 6 to dash 4 reducers, or 4 to 6 expanders, and they're $6.50 each. And then the Phoenix fittings are $4.45. These were kind of difficult to get onto the hoses. What I needed to do was heat the Superflex 397 hoses up, and I did that by just using some really hot water, so just below boiling, and putting the hose in for maybe a couple of minutes and then pushing it onto the push lock. So that one kind of wasn't the easiest thing to do. But that's the check valve. The bulkhead connection, you can see here on the firewall there's the fitting and then the 2 retaining nuts. So that's just an aluminum bulkhead fitting. The connection, we have the 90 degree. I used a 90 degree on the inside of the cockpit. And then there is actually 2 of these, one on the inside, one on the outside. And then we have the bulkhead union and the aluminum nuts. So that was $4.75 and then 98 cents. And then these push lock fittings, 90 degree, are $12.80 each. So they're a little bit more expensive than the straight ones. And then we have the header tank connection. And that is, if we look inside at the diagram, that is one of the push lock straight push lock fittings, dash 4 onto a dash 4 to 1/4 inch MPT 90-degree elbow. So looking at that, I think I bought the one from CPS for $16.50 as part of a separate order, but you can get them cheaper at Speedway if you're doing an order at Speedway. So that's the fuel return line. The second part of the system is the distribution block, and that's this kind of crazy thing we have here. And I think I have a picture of it over here. Yeah, this is what it looks like put together. So going back, we have this 6-sided, so it's 1 inlet, 5 outlet manifold, and then we have a barb to MPT, barb to MPT, barb to MPT. Left and right the carbs, and then we have that hose combination, and then there's one out going to the fuel return. Then we have a plug, and then we have the fuel pressure sensor. And so the fuel inlet is 1/4 inch, and we need to reduce that down to 1/8 of an inch. So that's why we've got this coupler, this reduction. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. So if we look here, the distribution block, we have the manifold. So this one came from McMaster Car at $29. This, once again, I did debate doing the standard Rotax one, and then when you added up all of the components that you needed for it, it was like $80, $90, $100. And I think this probably similar price, to be honest, but I think these are just as good. So the fittings that I used, the hose nipple to NPT, so the AN840, I got this from CPS. So all of these came from CPS. This plug actually came from McMaster, but you can get them from CPS as well. Just 1/8 inch NPT male fitting. And then this reducer was $4.35 from, I think, CPS. Yeah. And then finally the hoses, and this is the pattern again. The hose from the distribution block to the carbs are 1/4 inch. And then the dash 11 fire sleeve, and then the 13.3 Otica clamps, and then the Bandit clamp dash 1C. So that's the distribution block. And next up, the fuel pump. So the fuel pump is pretty much comes as a package, and then you have the 5/16 inch in, 1/4 inch out. And then there's some Parker Superflex, maybe a couple of feet for the, this is like a vent coming out of or an overflow coming out of the fuel pump. So the fuel pump is this Rotax 912 205 50. So the 893 115. And you hear a lot about this being maybe providing too much pressure. So they talk about like the Pierbergs being the best, and that's the one that I had on mine. If we flip back to the pictures, you can see this is the one I took off, and it has an inlet and an outlet, but it doesn't have the overflow. But yeah, they talk about these ones being a little bit too high pressure, but I've also heard that they've remedied that issue. So I'm going to run this one for a few weeks, maybe a month, and that's kind of why I bought the fuel pressure sensor, just to be able to monitor the pressure that's coming out of this pump. I've been running the engine, and it's actually doing pretty well with this. So then we have the in hose, which is the hose pattern again. The in is 5/16, which with 14.5 millimeter, and then the out hose is 1/4 with 11/16 inch, so dash 11 and 13.3. So that's the fuel pump. Then we have the Gascolator, and this one's kind of a little bit confusing in the diagram. The first part is the outlet fitting. So I bought a new one from Summit, and the reason I did that was if we flip back to here and look at the picture of my existing Gascolator. It has this 1/4" MPT to like, I think that's a 3/8 barb, and the hose is a 5/16. So I tried a few different methods to get the 5/16 Parker Superflex onto the end of this, but I just couldn't. So I ended up just cutting my losses and going for another fitting that's come from Summit. I think they were like $8.50. The fuel lines, the hard fuel lines are 5/16, but I did this kind of weird thing where I have a problem with my fuel line. If we look here, I've got this kind of 45 degree coming out of the Gascolator, and then that's 3/8. So this is a -6 AN to 1/4" MPT. And then it goes into this reducer and then goes down to 5/16. So if we flip over to the pictures, you can see my Gascolator has like a straight in picture of the Gascolator here, and you see this fitting is straight in, and then this line is coming in from the firewall bulkhead fitting, fuel fitting, and it's running past this. This is my coolant pipe, and then coming out of there is a hose that goes into my carb heaters, and this has been rubbing on this fuel line. Aluminum fuel line has been rubbing on this hose clamp for years, and if you look at the hose, the line underneath, you can see it's been cutting this big gouge in the fuel line, which is extremely dangerous. So kind of as this comes in, the reason this is happening is because there's not enough space to not rub on this this hose clamp. So what I've kind of tried to do is use a 45 degree and then point the fuel line kind of behind the hose, as opposed to having to wrap around and come back as a straight in approach. So the other problem is this fuel line is 5/16" diameter, and there are very few -5 fittings out there. It seems like a pretty rare fitting, and so the only things I could find were like couplers that were 45 degree. I couldn't find an actual fitting that was 45 degree. So that kind of brings us back to the complicated setup here, where you have the 5/16, which is coming out of the firewall, and then this adapter to go up to a 3/8, and then this 3/8 line to a 45, and that I go step up to the 45 to get a 3/8 45 degree adapter in there. So I don't know if that makes sense. I did actually manage to run a 5/8" past that problem, past that hose clamp, but I don't know if I trust it. It's kind of like slightly touching, and so we'll see how it goes. I think I have an option if I want to change that. The second part of the Gascolator side is a replacement rubber gasket, O-ring, and then a new Gascolator screen. So if we look, this new fuel line is the 3/8, so the -6 tube nuts, -6 tube sleeves, and then I bought 25 feet of 3/8", and this is just because it comes in 25 feet from Summit. Unfortunately, it's overkill, too much. And then I have this reducer. So this whole new fuel line section is just to be able to support that problem with the fuel line rubbing on the hose clamp. And then I have just some more original 5/16" aluminum fuel line, and this comes from CPS, called Versatube. I couldn't get 3/8 from CPS, so that's why I bought it from Summit. And then the tube nuts and sleeves. And then the replacement parts just came from CPS. The gasket was $5.85, and then the sleeve 120 micron replacement screen was $3.60. So pretty cheap on that. And that's the Gascolator side of the fuel system. And then the last part of it is this optional, which I'm saying is optional, fuel pressure sensor. So my fuel system, previous system, didn't have a fuel pressure sender on it. It was literally a $3 tee from I don't know, some crappy hose store. And that's kind of why I'm replacing it with better parts. And the manifold I bought to support this, I don't like this fuel pressure sensor. It's the cheapest one I could find. It's massive, bulky, it's heavy. I might, when I've run the fuel pump for a few months, I might go and just remove this and replace it with a plug. But yeah, this whole system setup was, fuel pressure sensor was this Mitchell brand for $46, and then the meter was $73. So we'll see. I'll just determine whether or not I want to keep that. But I think you can buy smaller ones. They're UMA ones, but they cost like $160 for the sensor and then $250 for the meter. So this was kind of like an interim compromise. And that's pretty much the fuel system. I think I have this all listed out in the spreadsheet that I'm going to link below, and yeah, it's sort of cut into the categories. So the return line cost me $233. The check valve is kind of expensive. The fire sleeve, and then the Gascolator was $81.18, and the big cost there was the 25-foot fuel lines. Then the fuel pump was the most expensive part of this. Then some fire sleeve cost, and that was $336. And then the distribution block, the manifold, and then the fittings, the whole thing cost me $142. And then the fuel pressure sensor was $120. So the whole thing was probably in the $800, $900 region for the fuel system. So I'll link these parts below, and then I'll link to this diagram and to the diagram that shows how this all goes together. Thanks very much, everyone. I hope you found this helpful, and if you did, please feel free to like it and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to do some more videos around the rest of the rubber replacement. So I've got the fuel system and the coolant system to go, and also I want to talk through some of the tools I used and other bits and pieces. So thanks very much for listening. Hope you found it helpful. All of the info is linked below, so yeah, check that out, and thanks very much.